Harry Lee Kuan Yew is known as a role model for many governing leaders as he went on to transform what was previously known as a third world British colony into the world's most prosperous and developed nation. The economic success laid out by Lee Kuan Yew's principles has always been understood by many people. Left and right, Lee Kuan Yew implemented educational and healthcare reforms to housing and infrastructure projects. He strived hard to erase corruption and opened up the economy of Singapore to the rest of the world, which helped the island nation to become a global trade for many commodities to eventually become a financial hub. His policies and political acumen have then made him a respected individual, both in Singapore and globally. What makes Lee Kuan Yew stand out, however, is in general terms due to his economic policies, which may sound very broad. Just what economic policies did he implement? Well, a lot, considering the amount of time he sat as Prime Minister. But to simplify everything that he has done, we can understand just how well his economic policies had enabled Singapore through the macroeconomy. Just how well did the economy of Singapore under his leadership perform? How have his implemented economic policies influenced factors such as GDP, unemployment, and inflation to the overall economic performance, and even factors that led to Singapore's international success? Simply, how did Singapore perform under macroeconomic standards from 1949, the year he entered and became the first Prime Minister of Singapore, to 1990, the final year of his governance? 5 important economic indicators can help us understand Singapore's success under Lee Kuan Yew. The first is the gross domestic product. Gross domestic product is defined simply as the value of all goods and services produced within a country's borders, and it is one of the most widely used measures of a country's overall economic performance. Tracing this back to 1949, however, would not show us anything, as the latest available data from both SingStat and the World Bank is from 1975 and 1960 respectively. But 1960 is still a good indicator, since Singapore was still in the phase of development and stood relatively at the same level compared to its neighbors. The World Bank data has shown that Singapore's GDP with constant 2015 currencies was measured at $5.9 billion US. Comparatively, Malaysia had $10 billion, Thailand with $15 billion, and Hong Kong with $12.5 billion. Per capita, however, Singapore was already affluent compared to both Malaysia and Thailand with $3,612, whereas Malaysia only had $1,286 and Thailand with $598. Hong Kong, however, ranked higher with $3,955, but its latest available data was in 1961. Throughout the coming years, however, Singapore would immediately outpace Hong Kong and leave behind both Malaysia and Thailand in GDP per capita. By 1970, Singapore's per capita would be $6,997, whereas Hong Kong's with $6,782. And Singapore would continue to have a higher per capita until the two closed gaps late in the 1980s. Considerably, Lee Kuan Yew had been implementing rapid economic policies throughout these years. In the 1970s, he went on to boost Singapore's economy by attracting foreign investments from multinational companies. It saw the arrival of Texas Instruments, Hewlett-Packard, and General Electric, which laid the foundations for turning Singapore into an electronic exporter the following decade. Moreover, Lee Kuan Yew had also initiated several other new industries, such as steel mills and services industries, which gave birth to companies such as Neptune Orient Lines and Singapore Airlines. The birth of many industrial and services companies was also followed by petrochemicals, which helped further boost economic growth. By 1990, Singapore's GDP per capita had reached $23,271, which made it one of the richest countries globally. It was to the point that it surpassed many countries that it once lagged, and even left behind its neighboring peers by large amounts. In 1960, per capita was even twice less compared to a good example known as Japan. By 1990, its per capita was now almost as high as Japan and would soon overtake the East Asian country. As calculated from 1965 to 1990, Singapore, under Lee Kuan Yew, averaged GDP growth of about 8%, a figure that not a lot of countries had failed to attain. Secondly, what led to a further strong Singaporean economy is that the country had a very strong public sector. Government spending, in other words, happens when the government initiates various strategies to implement public infrastructure and social programs. These can be the likes of transportation, housing, utilities, healthcare, and education. Government spending in most developing countries is often understood to be a big challenge because a lot of inefficiencies and corruption often come into play. Developing countries tend to not have the right skilled workforce to implement big projects such as infrastructure, and sometimes corruption can also slow down these policies. Moreover, government spending is also a very delicate issue since it has to balance its revenues and expenditures. But under Lee Kuan Yew, Singapore's public sector has seen a robust contribution. Corruption was reduced over time, and efficiency boomed as the government entrusted itself to finding highly educated individuals. Singapore then went on to spend billions of money to construct state-of-the-art systems, from basic infrastructures to healthcare and education. These would not be possible had the country failed to address corruption or to find the right workers to build such projects. It even noted some economists throughout the past that the key feature behind Lee Kuan Yew's success was the belief that the government had a responsibility to play an active role in the economy to drive economic growth. Thirdly, a strong public sector, but also in part due to many factors, has led Singapore to experience a staggeringly low unemployment rate. In 1976, the unemployment rate was at 3.9% for the male labor force, whereas for females, it was 5.8%. This would further drop to 1.2% for males and 2% for females in 1982. Attaining a low unemployment rate below 2% is a massive, unprecedented figure. It is understandable that the unemployment rate, even for advanced countries, has stayed somewhere around 4 to 6%. The OECD is even around 5.6% as of 2021. Moreover, unemployment in Singapore in the past few years has never been this low. Data from the same source shows that the unemployment rate in 2019, before COVID-19, was 3% for male participants. So how did Lee Kuan Yew pioneer a country with a low unemployment rate? Well, this is likely due to the push for a strong public sector, which helped build out infrastructure buildings and the implementation of social programs, thereby pushing jobs in the market, and also through several international and domestic investments. A lot would come into play why unemployment was low, but in simpler terms, it is both due to a strong public sector and also a strong private sector. Inflation is also a very good macro indicator to show how well Lee Kuan Yew managed the economy. And this is what truly made Lee Kuan Yew's economy so special. It is that he was able to maintain the country's strong 8% economic growth, yet keep inflation at a staggeringly low figure. Estimates suggest that it was somewhere between 2% to 4% per year. That also meant that the economy and its society were getting richer, yet at the same time, the general price level of goods and services had sustained only adequate increases over the same period. Economists have cited that it was because of his commitment to maintaining monetary stability and fiscal discipline. The government of Singapore had implemented policies aimed at controlling inflation. A lot of examples can be given here. One big factor is the management of the money supply through tight monetary policies. The implementation of the Monetary Authority of Singapore, which went on to oversee a policy framework in the early 1980s, has helped keep inflation low through the achievement of medium-term price stability and implemented through the management of exchange rate. Inflation being low is also a key reason why Singapore was able to create a favorable environment for investment and economic growth. These factors, however, are very limited to what most people thought of Lee Kuan Yew. What most people think of him is his implementation and reforms in housing, infrastructure, or other public services. These factors were indeed crucial, but if we take a step back and look at it from the entire macro perspective of Singapore, we would see just how well these initiatives have performed. But anyway, these are likewise not the only macroeconomic indicators out there, but may serve as some of the best. Do let us know what you think. What other factors have contributed to Lee Kuan Yew's success in your view? Or even possibly, one big important concept that we missed out on was the mistakes of his leadership. Thanks for watching.